Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Before we dive into the meat of today's video, I just wanted to give a quick thank you to all the people who have subscribed recently. I shot up from around 450 to 500 subscribers, and that's generally considered a milestone. Although on today's YouTube, 500 is not really that many in the grand scheme of things. It is still, frankly, more than I expected to get when I started this channel, and I'm very glad you all came in to have a look at what I have to say. I really appreciate it. For today, I wanted to take a look at the two remaining novellas in Have Spell Will Travel, the anthology I put out a month ago. While the first two novellas, Fire Spinner and Night Train to Hardwick, were concerned with Roy Harper's past and future, the next two are more about the day-to-day and the exceptional. Fire and Gold, the third story you'll find in the book, takes a look at Roy while he's doing what you could think of as his day-to-day work. He hunts down some monsters that are running roughshod through the West, and he deals with them in the way you deal with monsters anywhere. It was certainly an interesting story to write, in that I wanted to tell most of it from the point of view of the story's antagonists. I've always had kind of a soft spot for the idea of a heroic figure as a sort of terrifying and unrelenting force, and this was an opportunity to show Roy Harper in that light. Roy comes into the situation with an advantage on all fronts. He knows more about his opponents, he has more experience in the ways of combat, and he's more experienced in the ways of magic, at least compared to most of them. And he has allies that share all of those advantages. So telling the story from his point of view is actually not particularly satisfying. Showing the conflict from the other side of it, from the monsters that are outclassed and terrified, as Roy picks them off one by one, makes for a better story, at least in my opinion. This serves a number of goals. First of all, it shows that in his day-to-day work, Roy is very good at what he does. He's a famous mercenary for a reason, after all. Second, it kind of broadens the audience's understanding of the kind of dangers in the Colombian West that just exist day to day. There's no grand scheme surrounding these monsters. They have arisen through some acts of mundane evil, and they will be dealt with through means of fairly mundane justice, at least for the world they live in. Third, and just as importantly, it establishes something of a status quo going forward. In the first story, Roy was very concerned with allies he's had in the past. In the second story, some allies that are going to be important to him in the present are introduced. Fire and Gold gives us an opportunity to see kind of where the balance point of cooperation between Roy and the Fairchilds is going to be. The fourth and final novella in the collection is called A Candle in the Wind. Now, originally, I was thinking of doing another story here called The Duelist's Mark. That story was going to take place at Oakhart Manor, which is Roy's house at Keegan's Bluff. I chose to push that back for a couple of reasons. The biggest one was I didn't want to go to Roy's residence in the first collection. The whole idea of the Roy Harper stories originally was to have a person who traveled around the Colombian West and went to a bunch of different places. I didn't want him to have a home base per se. I mean, yes, Oakhart Manor is the place where Roy lives most of the year, but the story doesn't really need to revolve around Oakhart Manor as a location. It's not 221 Baker Street. We don't need a procession of clients showing up there to hire Roy for jobs. That's not the way I want to go around telling his stories. The other reason is timeline related. Night Train to Hardwick introduces a plot point, namely the death of a character, that then has some other events tied to it time-wise. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but I needed the events of Candle in the Wind to occur not too long after Night Train to Hardwick. And while I could tell all of Roy's stories out of order, and to a certain extent I have, I didn't want to write them too far out of order, at least for the major events, because keeping all that straight for a long period of time gets tricky really quick. So I chose to have A Candle in the Wind be the fourth short story, both because I didn't want to do The Duelist's Mark right away. I thought it was better if we didn't go to Oakhart Manor in the first collection. If Fire and Gold is representative of the kind of work Roy does on a regular basis, dealing with these monsters in small settlements for small payouts, A Candle in the Wind is representative of the really big events in Roy's life. Roy comes to a small seaside town called Riker's Cove in order to pay back a favor to a dead man. That man is Jonathan Riker, the founder of the town, whose statue will watch most of the events play out. While there, Roy will try and use his allies to best effect and avoid too much attention from the local sheriff, who fought on the other side of the Lakeshire War and has a bit of an axe to grind with Roy himself. But the main problem in the town is not the sheriff. The problem is a dark wizard by the name of Heinrich von Nyberg, a person with no qualms about trading human life for arcane power and is tampering with otherworldly forces the likes of which mortal men were not meant to interact with. If the gold drinkers of Fire and Gold were your everyday run-of-the-mill Colombian monster, the forces behind von Nyberg are pretty much the worst thing Roy could expect to encounter in his whole life. And it's going to take pretty much everything he can throw at it in order to bring them down. And even with that, he may not put a stop to Nyberg for good. From the beginning, A Candle in the Wind was conceptualized as throwing the biggest possible challenge Roy could face at him and seeing how he dealt with it. The battle at Riker's Cove was fun to write, and conceptually, I thought it was a pretty neat idea. I particularly like the way the characters come together at the climax, although that may just play into my own personal desires for how really good ensemble writing plays out. And I did conceive As a Candle in the Wind as having more of an ensemble cast rather than being carried by a single character. It has more perspective shifts than any other story I think I've ever written, and that made it both challenging and fun to write. Hopefully, it's equally fun to read. And finally, Riker's Cove is one of the 3 landmarks I conceived of in Roy's life, the other 2 being the Summer of Snow and the Siege of Black Sun Mesa, one of which has happened in Roy's past, and the other one is coming one of these days. Not quite sure when I'll get to that, but it is coming, and if you're interested in seeing it, the best way to make sure it happens soon is to check out Have Spell Will Travel and pick up a copy for yourself and all your friends. You can pick up the ebook on Amazon using the link down below in the description. Now, with the release of this video, I'm pretty much done for the season. I'm going to try and put out a fixed version of the audio for the pulp prose problem, probably on Wednesday, but other than that, I plan to take a couple of weeks off and enjoy the holidays, which hopefully you'll do as well. I plan to begin posting videos again on December 30th. Hopefully, you'll stick with me until then. If you've read my book, please let me know what your favorite story is down in the comments below. I'm really excited to see what people are enjoying the most out of this collection. While you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.